The cantina on Epsilon 7 reeked of fermented algae and burnt metal. Purple smoke drifted from pipes scattered across rusty tables. In the darkest corner booth, Veltar hunched over his drink like a broken statue. His scarred carapace gleamed. Under the flickering neon lights that buzzed and sparked overhead, 3 cybernetic arms moved with mechanical precision where flesh and bone once lived. The humans had taken those from him during the war. Around his table sat a mix of young aliens. From across the galaxy, their eyes were bright with curiosity, unmarked by the horrors of real combat. They'd heard whispers about the Terran integration wars, but never from someone who'd actually been there. "Tell us about the humans," whispered Crix, a young Altarian, whose blue skin had never seen the flash of plasma fire or the cold vacuum of space. His gills fluttered nervously as he spoke. Veltar's compound eyes slowly rotated to focus on the eager faces surrounding him. Each face showed the same expression he'd once worn himself, the cocky confidence of youth mixed with deadly curiosity. The cantina's background noise seemed to fade as other patrons unconsciously leaned in to listen. "You want to know about humans?" Veltar's voice carried the weight of 1,000 battles. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you when you can't sleep tonight." He lifted his drink with one cybernetic arm, the servos whining softly. The liquid inside was thick and green, something that would kill most carbon-based life forms. Needed it to dull the memories that never stopped playing in his head. "Before I tell you anything, you need to understand something. Every species in this galaxy fights for territory, resources, or dominance. The Zephyrians fight for honor. The Korthok fight for survival. The Altarians fight for principle." He gestured at each species represented around the table. "But humans fight for something else entirely." A young Zephyrian with golden scales spoke up. "What's so special about human warfare? They're the newest species in the galaxy. Barely discovered faster than light travel 50 years ago." Mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "That's exactly what we thought. Started on Kepler 438b, a backwater mining world on the edge of human space. Command told us it would be easy. It's just a mining colony with maybe 1,000 humans scattered across the surface. Our fleet of 50 ships against their handful of miners and whatever pathetic defense they could muster." The aliens leaned closer as Veltar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The cantina's other patrons had stopped their conversations entirely now, drawn by the veteran's words. "We expected to find frightened civilians hiding in bunkers. Maybe a few security guards with outdated weapons. Instead, we found something that still gives me nightmares 20 years later." Veltar's cybernetic eye began to glow red as his emotion sensors activated. Commander Hyansu was running the mining operation, just an engineer, according to our intelligence. Graduated from some technical college on Earth, specialized in deep core extraction. No military training, no combat experience. On paper, he should have been helpless. The veteran paused, his organic eye staring into the distance as if seeing something the others couldn't. "When our dropships broke through the atmosphere, we expected to see mining equipment and prefab shelters. Instead, we found a fortress. Every single piece of mining equipment had been weaponized. Plasma cutters that could slice through starship hulls were mounted on rotating platforms. Massive excavators had been turned into mobile weapons platforms, bristling with improvised cannons." A young Korthok warrior interrupted. "But surely your advanced weapons could handle primitive mining tools?" Veltar's mandibles clicked again, but this time there was no humor in the sound. "That's what we thought. Our first wave of assault troops landed expecting minimal resistance. Instead, they walked into a perfectly coordinated defense network. Hyansu had turned the entire mining complex into a death trap." His cybernetic arms began to move as he spoke, unconsciously mimicking the motions of combat. "Our processors became explosive traps that could sense our body heat. Gravity manipulation systems designed to move asteroids were redirected to crush our heavy walkers like tin cans. Transport tunnels became kill zones where our soldiers disappeared one by one." The cantina was now completely silent, except for Veltar's voice and the distant hum of the station's life support systems. For 3 weeks, That mining engineer held off our entire ground force. 3 weeks. We had superior numbers, better training, advanced technology. But every time we thought we'd gained ground, the humans would spring another trap. They used the planet's geology against us, channeling lava flows to cut off our supply lines. They turned their own mining shafts into sniper nests that our scanners couldn't penetrate. Veltar's voice grew softer, more dangerous. The worst part wasn't the fighting. It was the silence between battles. We'd take a position, thinking we'd won, and then, ... nothing. No counterattack, no desperate charges, just silence, till our soldiers started disappearing in the night. A shiver ran through the assembled aliens. They'd all heard stories of human stealth tactics, but hearing it from someone who'd experienced it firsthand was different. When we finally cornered Hyansu in the main shaft, he was down to just a handful of miners. Maybe 20 people total. We had them completely surrounded. No escape route, no hope of rescue. Our commander called for their surrender over the CUM system. "What happened?" Crix asked, his voice barely audible. Veltar's compound eyes fixed. On the young Altarian, he smiled. Actually smiled. Was close enough to see his face through my helmet's magnification. He looked at his remaining people, said something in Korean that our translators couldn't pick up, and then he looked directly at our cameras. The veteran's cybernetic arm word as he clenched it into a fist. Said, "Tell your children about this day. Tell them what happens when you threaten our home." Then he pressed a button on his mining console. The silence in the cantina was absolute now. Even the background hum of machinery seemed to have stopped. He detonated the entire mine. His section, the entire complex. 27 separate explosions in perfect sequence timed to maximize the structural collapse. The blast took out half our ground force instantly and buried the rest of us under a mountain of rock and metal. I spent 6 days trapped in that tomb, listening to the screams of my unit mates as they died one by one. Velta raised his drink, again his hand shaking slightly. That's when I learned the truth about humans. They don't just fight. They become the fight itself. Every tool, every piece of equipment, every drop of blood, it all becomes part of their war machine. He looked around the table at the pale, frightened faces staring back at him, and that was just the beginning. You think that was bad? Veltar continued, his voice growing darker as the memories flooded back. The cybernetic implants along. His skull began to pulse with a dim red light, responding to his elevated stress levels. Let me tell you about the Void Nebula. The cantina had grown quieter, their patrons abandoning their own conversations to edge closer to the scarred veteran's table. Even the bartender, a massive 6-armed Thurian, had stopped cleaning glasses to listen. The air itself seemed to thicken. With anticipation, Veltar's remaining organic eye twitched as he stared into the swirling depths of his drink. 3 months after Kepler 438b, High Command decided the humans needed to be taught a lesson. They assembled the largest battle fleet in hegemony history. 200 of our finest warships, crewed by veterans from a dozen different species. The plan was simple: hit their supply convoys, destroy their forward bases, force them to negotiate. Laughed bitterly, the sound like grinding metal. We thought we were hunting prey. We had no idea we were about to become it. A young Thraxian engineer leaned forward, his crystalline features reflecting the cantina's dim lights. "But surely your fleet's superior firepower gave you the advantage." "That's what we believed," Velta replied, his cybernetic fingers drumming. Against the table with mechanical precision, Admiral Deho commanded their pursuit fleet. 53 ships against our 200. On paper, it should have been a massacre in our favor. The veteran's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone to strain to hear him. The battle started near the edge of the Void Nebula, that massive cloud of ionized gas that scrambles every sensor in the galaxy. We hit their convoy hard, destroyed half their escort ships in the first engagement. Standard tactical doctrine said they should have retreated to their nearest base for reinforcements. Veltar's compound eyes slowly rotated, scanning the faces around him. Instead, they followed us into the nebula, into that sensor-dead hellscape where even our most advanced targeting systems become useless. We thought they were desperate, maybe trying to use the interference to escape, He paused to take another drink, his organic hand trembling slightly. 17 days. For 17 straight days, they hunted us through that maze of gas and debris. 17 days without rest, without resupply, without a moment's peace. Every time we thought we'd lost them, they'd appear out of nowhere like ghosts. The Thurian bartender had moved closer now, all 6 arms motionless as he listened. Around the cantina, conversations had died completely. The only sounds were the distant hum of life support systems and Veltar's haunting voice. Our ships were faster, our weapons more powerful, our crew larger and better trained. We should have escaped within hours, but humans. Veltar's mandibles clicked in a mixture of fear and grudging respect. Humans don't think like the rest of us. When we fight, we calculate odds, conserve resources, plan strategic withdrawals. Humans, they just refuse to stop. A Zephyrian pilot with golden scales spoke up. How could they track you through sensor interference? That's what terrified us, Veltar replied. Captain Subin led their strike wing, 24 fighters against our entire fleet. When the nebula's radiation fried her targeting computers, she switched to visual tracking. Actually stuck her head out of the cockpit during combat maneuvers. Using her own eyes to aim, the aliens around the table exchanged incredulous glances. Flying in the vacuum of space without a sealed helmet was certain death for most species. When her missile racks ran empty, she started ramming our fighters. Not suicidal desperation, calculated impacts designed to disable rather than destroy, saving her own ship while taking out ours. I watched her fighter slam into my wingman's, crafted over 300 kilometers per hour. Both ships should have been destroyed instantly. Veltar's cybernetic eye glowed brighter. Instead, her ship bounced off like it was made of rubber. The humans had reinforced their hulls with some kind of adaptive material that absorbed impact energy. My wingman's fighter spun out of control, but Subin's ship just kept coming. The veteran's voice became distant, as if he was seeing the battle play out again in his mind. On day 12, her ship took a direct hit from one of our plasma cannons. Blew out half her hull, vented her atmosphere into space. Any sane pilot would have ejected or called for rescue. Instead, she sealed herself into a vacuum suit and kept flying. A Korthok warrior shook his head in disbelief. No one can pilot a spacecraft in a pressure suit. The response time alone would be fatal in combat. That's what we thought too, Veltar replied grimly. But Subin flew for 6 more hours with no life support, her ship held together by emergency patches and pure determination. I watched her chase down my squadron leader through an asteroid field, dodging rocks the size of buildings while bleeding from decompression injuries. The cantina was so quiet now that the hum of the station's rotation became audible. Even the background music had stopped, as if the establishment's systems were listening to. When she finally caught him, her fighter was more wreckage than spacecraft. Hull breached in 17 places, engines running on backup power, weapons, systems completely dead. But she still had one trick left. Veltar's organic eye closed as he relived the memory. She activated her ship's mining laser, a tool meant for cutting asteroids, not combat. At point-blank range, she carved through my squadron leader's shields like they were paper. His ship broke apart in seconds. The veteran's cybernetic arms moved unconsciously, mimicking the flight patterns he'd witnessed decades ago. Wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what happened next. Instead of finishing him off, she used her ship's grappling system to pull his escape pod to safety. Even while she was dying from her injuries, she saved his life. Why? Whispered Crix, his blue skin now pale with shock. Because that's what humans do, Veltar replied. They'll fight you to the death, but they won't let you die alone. 3 hours later, when our rescue ship arrived, we found Subin unconscious in her cockpit, still gripping the controls. The medic said she'd been clinically dead for 20 minutes, but somehow kept flying on instinct alone. The silence stretched for long moments before Veltar continued. By day 17, they'd picked us off one by one, a fleet of 200, ships reduced to 37 survivors. We'd started calling them the Pack, because they hunted like the predators from their homeworld. Coordinated, relentless, absolutely ruthless when cornered. He looked up at the assembled aliens, his compound, eyes reflecting their frightened faces, and the humans. After 17 days of constant combat, after losing half their own ships, after pushing themselves beyond any reasonable limit, they were still coming, still hunting, still singing those haunting war songs over the channels. Voice dropped to barely a whisper. That's when I understood the truth. Humans aren't just another species with weapons and ships. They're the apex predators of the galaxy, and we just taught them how to hunt among the stars. The veteran raised his glass in a mock toast. To Admiral Deho and Captain Suben, may the galaxy never again give them reason to remember what they're truly capable of. The cantina remained silent long after he finished speaking, the weight of his words settling over them like the darkness between stars. The veteran's expression hardened. As he began his most chilling tale, the cybernetic implants along his skull flickered from red to deep crimson, and his remaining organic eyes seemed to lose all warmth. Around the cantina, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees as if the very air was responding to the darkness of the memory he was about to share. Then came New Geneva, Veltar said, his voice carrying a weight that made several aliens unconsciously lean back. Beautiful colony world on the edge of human space. Rolling green hills, crystal-clear lakes. Cities that look like something from a dream. 2 million civilians living peaceful lives, farming, raising families, building a future among the stars. He paused, staring into the depths of his drink, as if seeing the planet's surface reflected there. The Covenant High Council thought they were being clever. They'd studied human psychology, read every report from our previous encounters. They believed humans were just another species that could be broken through fear. Silence fell over the cantina like a heavy blanket. Even the station's background hum seemed too quiet, as if the very walls were holding their breath. They were wrong. So very wrong. Veltar's cybernetic fingers began drumming against the table, each tap echoing like a funeral bell. The sound was hypnotic, drawing everyone deeper into his tale. The attack came without warning. Covenant stealth ships dropped out of hyperspace directly above the planet. No military targets, no strategic installations. They went straight for the civilian centers. The young Altarian's gills fluttered nervously. But surely the humans had defenses. 3 orbital platforms and a handful of patrol ships, Veltar replied bitterly. New Geneva wasn't a military world. It was a farming colony, a place where humans went to escape the violence of the galaxy. The Covenant destroyed those defenses in the first 10 minutes. His voice grew quieter, more dangerous. Then they began what they called psychological conditioning. Systematic bombardment of schools, hospitals, residential areas. They broadcast it all across human space, demanding surrender. They thought humans would see the suffering and give up. The veteran's organic eye closed, and for a moment, the pain on his scarred face was visible to everyone in the cantina. Lieutenant Yunji was on leave when it happened, visiting her parents, playing with her 2 children in their garden. She was a combat engineer trained to build bridges and repair equipment, not a frontline soldier. Veltar opened his eye, and the assembled aliens could see something burning in its depths. When the first Covenant bomber struck her neighborhood, she was helping her 5-year-old daughter plant flowers. The blast waved through her 300 meters. When she woke up, her house was gone. Her parents, her children, her husbandhood, been making lunch in the kitchen. All gone. The silence in the cantina was absolute now. Even the bartender had stopped moving, his 6 arms frozen in the act of reaching for a glass. The Covenant expected humans to negotiate after that. To seek peace talks, maybe offer tribute in exchange for mercy. They'd broken dozens of species. That way, turned proud warriors into cowering subjects through strategic cruelty. Veltar's laugh was like breaking glass. Instead, they got something else entirely. Something that still haunts my dreams 20 years later. He leaned forward, his cybernetic arms worry as they adjusted to support his weight. Yunji didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't collapse in grief like any normal person would. She stood up, brushed the dust off her clothes, and walked to the nearest military depot. "What did she do?" whispered Crix, though his voice suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "She requisitioned a ship, not a fighter or a bomber, a construction vessel designed for building space stations. Then she started recruiting. Soldiers, but survivors. People who'd lost everything, just like her. Within 72 hours, she had a fleet of converted civilian ships and a crew of 10,000 volunteers. Veltar's voice took on an almost hypnotic quality. They called themselves the Broken Chain. No official military designation, no government backing. Just ordinary humans who decided they had nothing left to lose. Zephyrian warrior shook his head, but untrained civilians can't fight a military campaign. That's what the Covenant thought too, Veltar replied. Within a month, every Covenant military installation across 12 systems was gone. Not destroyed, erased. Wiped from existence so completely that even their emergency beacons stopped transmitting. Cybernetic eye began to glow brighter as the memories intensified. Yunji led strike teams that fought for 72 hours straight without sleep. When their weapons broke, they used mining tools. When their ships ran out of ammunition, they turned the wreckage into kinetic weapons. They'd ram Covenant stations at near light speed, turning cargo haulers into guided missiles. And the veterans' voice dropped too, barely above a whisper, forcing everyone to lean closer. I was part of the garrison on Kepler Station when they came. 50,000 Covenant troops, the finest warriors from 6 different species, protected by energy shields and automated defenses. He paused, his organic hand shaking as he reached for his drink. Yunji's people didn't try to take the station. They just surrounded it, parked their ships in a perfect sphere around our position, and waited. For what? Asked a young Korthok. Engineer? For us to run out of supplies, Veltar replied. For 60 days, they just sat there, watching, waiting, broadcasting the names of everyone who died on New Geneva over and over again. 2 million names, spoken in sequence, 24 hours a day. The cantina's atmosphere had become suffocating. Several aliens were breathing heavily, their various respiratory systems struggling with the weight of Veltar's words. When we finally tried to break out, they were ready. Sergeant Minho led a boarding party onto our flagship. When our security teams cut off his squad's retreat, he crawled through burning corridors with both legs broken, planting charges by hand. Took out our entire command structure in one coordinated explosion. Veltar's cybernetic arms moved unconsciously, mimicking the motions of combat. Corporal Lejin held the docking bay for 3 hours while her team evacuated wounded civilians. She had 17 separate injuries, plasma burns, projectile wounds, shrapnel cuts. Any one of them should have been fatal. But she kept fighting. Until the last transport cleared the station. How is that possible? Breathed a Thurian medic. Because humans don't feel pain the same way we do when they're protecting something, Veltar replied. They have something called adrenaline that turns them into living weapons. The Jinn didn't stop fighting because she couldn't. Her body literally wouldn't let her die until her mission was complete. The veteran's voice became so quiet that the aliens had to strain to hear him. By the end of the first month, they'd developed new tactics. They'd board our ships, but instead of killing the crew, they'd just ... disable everything. Life support, weapons, communications. Then they'd paint messages on our hull plates. What kind of messages? Crix asked, though his voice was barely audible. Names, Veltar whispered. The names of their dead. Written in their own blood because they'd run out of paint. Ships would drift into Covenant space, covered in thousands of names. Crews alive but broken, carrying the message that humanity hadn't forgotten. He looked up at the assembled aliens, his compound eyes reflecting their horrified faces. Within 6 months, Covenant forces wouldn't even enter human space. They called it the Death Sector. Pilots would refuse orders rather than cross the boundary. Entire fleets would mutiny rather than face what the humans had become. Veltar raised his glass with a cybernetic hand that shook with remembered terror. And through it all, Yonji kept broadcasting the same message. We are not your enemy. We are your reminder. Remember New Geneva. Remember what happens when you target the innocent. The silence that followed was deeper than the void between. Stars. Finally, a young alien spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. Did she ever find peace? Veltar's organic eye focused on the questioner, and for a moment, something almost like hope flickered in its depths. 20 years later, I met her again. She was running a refugee camp on the border worlds, helping survivors from a dozen different species still fighting, but now she was fighting to save lives instead of taking them. He set down his glass with mechanical precision. That's when I understood the truth about humans. They're not monsters. They're mirrors. They reflect whatever you show them, magnified 1,000-fold. Show them kindness, and they'll die to protect you. Show them cruelty. Veltar's voice trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like a loaded weapon. The cantina remained. Silent, everyone lost in their own thoughts about what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of predators. But nothing, Veltar continued, his voice taking on a tone that made the air itself seem to vibrate with dread. Nothing compared to the defense of Terra. The cantina was now completely silent except for his voice and the distant hum of the station's life support systems. Every patron had abandoned their own conversations, drawn by the magnetic horror of the veteran's tale. Even the automated serving droids had stopped moving, as if their programming couldn't compete with the gravity of what they were hearing. Veltar remaining organic, I stared into the middle distance, seeing not the dingy cantina but the vast emptiness of space filled with the largest armada in galactic history. After New Geneva, after the Void Nebula, after everything we'd witnessed, the Grand Alliance finally understood what they were dealing with. Humans weren't just another species, to be conquered or negotiated with. They were something entirely different. He paused, letting his cybernetic fingers trace patterns on the table's surface. Every major power in the galaxy contributed to the fleet. Zephorian dreadnoughts, with their plasma cannons that could crack moons. Korthok battlecruisers armed with quantum torpedoes. Tarian stealth ships that could phase through solid matter. Thurian heavy carriers loaded with fighter swarms. A young engineer from the outer colonies leaned forward. How many ships total? 3,000, Veltar replied, and the number hung in the air like a death sentence. 3,000 of the most advanced warships ever built, crewed by the finest. Warriors from 40 different species. It's the largest military force assembled since the ancient Empire Wars, all united with one purpose, to end the human threat once and for all. The veteran's cybernetic eye began to glow brighter, responding to the intensity of his memories. The plan was simple. Overwhelming force applied directly to humanity's homeworld. No negotiation, no mercy, no chance for the tactical brilliance. That had saved them before. Just raw, crushing power that would make resistance impossible. He lifted his drink with a mechanical hand that trembled despite its servo-assisted stability. General Wu Jin commanded Earth's defense. A career soldier who'd never lost a battle, but even he couldn't work miracles. 57 ships. All humanity could muster to defend their birth world. 57 against 3,000. The silence in the cantina was so complete that the sound of Veltar swallowing his drink seemed loud as a gunshot. Any other species would have surrendered immediately. The mathematics were impossible. Even if every human ship destroyed 50 enemy vessels, they'd still be overwhelmed. Command expected to receive a transmission of unconditional surrender. Within hours of our arrival, Veltar's compound eyes rotated slowly, taking in the terrified faces around him. Instead, when our long-range sensors picked up the human fleet, we detected something that made no sense. They were advancing toward us, not retreating to defensive positions, not trying to negotiate. They were coming straight at the largest armada in galactic history with 57 ships and what looked like a death wish. Zephyrian pilots' golden scales had turned pale yellow with fear. What did you do? We laughed. Veltar admitted, his voice heavy with shame. We actually laughed. Admiral Kestar, of the Hegemony flagship, sent a message offering the humans one final chance to surrender. The response came back in perfect galactic standard, broadcast on all frequencies, so every ship in both fleets could hear it. What? The veterans. Voice dropped to barely above a whisper. General Wu Jin himself spoke. He said, "You have come to our home. You threaten our children. You offer us slavery disguised as mercy. We reject your offer. We reject your authority. We reject your very existence in our space. Come and take what you can. But know that every meter will cost you more than you can afford to pay. Veltar's cybernetic arms moved unconsciously, mapping out the battle formation in the air above the table. That's when we realized they'd turned their entire world into a weapon. Every space elevator had been converted into a mass driver capable of launching projectiles at relativistic speeds. Every orbital station had been transformed into a missile platform. The moon itself bristled with defensive installations that hadn't been there a year before. The bartender had moved closer, all 6 arms frozen in fascination and horror. But surely your superior numbers. Numbers meant nothing, Veltar interrupted. Because humanity had done something unprecedented in galactic warfare. They'd mobilized their entire population for total war. It's not just their military, not just their industrial capacity, but every single human being on the planet. His organic eye closed as he relived the memory. Children as young as 12 were working in shipyards, welding hull plates, and calibrating weapons systems. Elderly humans who should have been in retirement were manning communication stations and coordinating supply lines. Teachers and farmers and shopkeepers were flying combat missions, and fighters held together with determination and emergency patches. That's impossible, breathed a Korthak warrior. Civilians can't fight trained soldiers. That's what we thought too, Veltar replied grimly. Major Hyjin led a squadron of exactly those people. Her wingman was a baker from Seoul who'd learned to fly in civilian racing circuits. Her tactical officer was a retired school teacher who'd studied military history as a hobby. Her engineer was a 16-year-old girl whose only qualification was that she could repair anything with the right tools in enough time. The veteran's voice began to crack with emotion. When the main battle started, Hyjin's squadron was assigned to protect the orbital farms. Simple enough mission, keep enemy fighters away from the food production facilities. But when our advance force broke through the defensive perimeter, she made a decision that still haunts me. Veltar's cybernetic eye glowed so brightly now that it cast shadows across his scarred face. Instead of falling back to regroup, she ordered her entire squadron to ram the leading edge of our formation. 24 civilian pilots and converted cargo haulers charging directly at our main battle line. The cantina's atmosphere had become suffocating. Several aliens were breathing heavily, their various physiologies struggling with the weight of the story. I was on the bridge of the flagship when Hyjin's fighter broke through our point defenses. Her weapons had run out of ammunition hours. Earlier, her life support was failing, and her ship was held together by emergency foam and prayer. But she kept coming. Veltar's voice became distant, as if he was watching the scene play out again in his mind. She hit our bridge at over 400 kilometers per hour. The impact should have killed everyone instantly. Dead, as her ship broke apart around her, I heard something that will haunt me until the day I die. What? Crix asked, though. His voice was barely audible. She was singing, Veltar whispered. Actually singing as she died. An old Korean folk song about coming home. The translation came through our universal communicators, and the words were about a soldier returning to see his family after a long war. The veteran's organic hand reached up to touch a scar along his jaw. The explosion took out our primary command center and killed half the bridge crew. But in her final moments, instead of screaming in pain or fear, Hyjin was singing about hope. Veltar's cybernetic arms moved again, this time more frantically, as if trying to ward off the memories. That was just one pilot, one moment in a battle that lasted for 18 hours. Private Jin Woo held Orbital Defense Platform 7 alone. For 3 hours after his entire unit was killed, 3 hours. Enemy boarding parties couldn't understand why the station's weapons kept firing even after they'd cleared every level. His voice rose slightly, filled with a mixture of admiration and terror. When they finally breached the command center, they found him still at his post. Dead from exhaustion, multiple wounds, probably been gone for 20 minutes. But his hand was still on the firing control, muscle memory keeping the defensive systems active even after his brain had shut down. A young Altarian made a sound that might have been a sob. How did you survive? Luck, Veltar replied bitterly. Pure random luck. We're shit. My ship was assigned to the second wave. which never made it to the planet's surface. By the time we reached combat range, the humans had turned the space around Earth into a graveyard. He gestured with his cybernetic arms, mapping out the debris field. Floating hulks of destroyed ships, some of them our own vessels turned into improvised weapons. The humans had developed a tactic where they'd board crippled enemy ships, repair just enough systems to make them mobile, and then use them as guided missiles against their own former fleets. Veltar's voice dropped to barely a whisper. In the end of our 3,000 ships, only 400 escaped. 400 out of 3,000, defeated by 57 human vessels and the pure, terrifying will of 8 billion humans, who refused to die quietly. The silence that followed was deeper than the void between galaxies. Finally, the bartender spoke, his voice heavy with disbelief. How is that possible? Veltar looked up at him, his compound eyes reflecting the cantina's dim lights like fractured mirrors. Because we were fighting a war. But the humans? They were fighting for their right to exist. There's a difference, and it's the difference between victory and annihilation. He raised his glass one final time, his cybernetic hand steady, despite the magnitude of what he'd just shared. To General Wujin, Major Hujin, Private Jinwu, and the 8 billion humans who taught the galaxy what it truly means to defend your home. The cantina remained silent, every patron lost in their own thoughts about what it meant to face an enemy that would rather die than surrender. As the first light of the station's artificial dawn crept through the cantina's grimy windows, casting long shadows across the assembled faces, Veltar's tale drew toward its close. The veteran's cybernetic implants had dimmed to a soft blue glow, no longer pulsing with the violent red of combat memories. Around him, the aliens sat in stunned silence, their various physiologies showing signs of emotional exhaustion. After Terra, everything changed. Veltar began, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to settle on everyone's shoulders. The Grand Alliance was broken, not just militarily but spiritually. We'd thrown everything we had at humanity and been crushed by their sheer refusal to accept defeat. He paused, staring at his cybernetic hands as they rested on the table. I spent the next 8 months in a human medical facility on Proxima Station, recovering from my wounds. Half my organs had been replaced, my nervous system rebuilt from scratch. By all rights, I should have died in the wreckage of my ship. Cantina's morning shift was beginning to arrive. But they moved quietly around the edges of the room, sensing the gravity of what was being shared. Even the cleaning droids seemed to hover at a respectful distance. That's where I met Dr. Etch, Veltar continued, and for the first time since he'd begun speaking, his expression softened slightly. Chief of Xenobiology at the medical center. She'd spent the entire war treating wounded from both sides, working around the clock to save anyone who could be saved. A young Korthok engineer leaned forward. She treated enemy combatants. Not just treated them, Veltar replied. She could have let me die. Any other species would have. I was an enemy officer who had participated in attacks on human colonies. My medical records clearly showed I'd been involved in military operations that killed thousands of humans. By any reasonable standard of justice, I deserved to be left. To die from my injuries? His organic eye closed as he remembered. Instead, she worked 18-hour days for 2 months straight to save my life. Performed 7 separate surgeries to rebuild my internal systems. When my species embassy refused to provide compatible blood substitutes, she synthesized them in her own laboratory. The veteran's voice grew quieter, more contemplative. I was conscious for most of it. My brain chemistry made human anesthetics ineffective, so I was awake during the procedures. I watched her hands move with absolute precision, saving the life of someone who had tried to destroy everything she cared about. Veltar opened his eye and looked around the silent cantina. One day, about 6 weeks into my recovery, I finally worked up the courage to ask her the question that had been eating at me. Why? Why save me? Why show mercy to someone who had caused so much death and suffering? The assembled aliens leaned closer, drawn by the intimate nature of the revelation. Outside the windows, the station's artificial sun was climbing higher. casting warm light across faces that had been pale with fear just moments before. She was checking my surgical sites at the time, Veltar continued. Her hands were gentle, professional, showing no sign of the hatred I expected to see. When I asked the question, she didn't answer immediately. She finished her examination, made notes on her medical pad, and then sat down in the chair beside my bed. The veteran's cybernetic fingers began tracing patterns on the table again. But this time the movement seemed almost peaceful. She said, "During the war, I treated over 3,000 wounded soldiers. Human, Zephyrian, Korthak, Altarian, Thurian. Didn't matter what species they were, or which side they fought for, they all bled the same color. They all cried for their families when they thought they were dying." Veltar's voice took on a different quality now, carrying an echo of the human doctor's words. Then she looked directly at me with those strange human eyes and said, "Because that's what makes us human. We fight like demons to protect what we love, but we don't hate our enemies. Pity them." The silence in the cantina was absolute. Even the background hum of the station's system seemed to have faded away. That's when I understood, Veltar whispered. Everything I'd witnessed, every impossible victory, every moment of terrifying determination. Humans don't fight brutally because they're savage monsters. They fight desperately because they love fiercely. Every human who died ramming our ships did so not from bloodlust or hatred, but from love. Love for their families, their friends, their species, their way of life. He looked up at the assembled faces, his compound eyes reflecting their mixed expressions of fear and wonder. Private Ginwu didn't hold that defense platform for 3 hours because he hated us. He held it because somewhere on Earth, there were children who needed protecting. Major Haijin didn't ram our flagship because she wanted revenge. It because she loved her world more than she feared death. A young Altarian's voice broke the silence, barely above a whisper. Are the humans truly at peace now? Veltar's compound eyes fixed on the questioner, and for a moment, the old terror returned to his voice like an echo from the depths of space. That's the question, isn't it? The question that keeps me awake at night even 20 years later. Leaned back in his seat, his cybernetic arms adjusting with soft mechanical whirs. The humans are our allies now. They sit on the Galactic Council as equals, not as conquered subjects or junior partners. Their children play with our children in integrated schools across a dozen worlds. Their doctors heal our sick without asking for payment. Their engineers design the ships that keep our trade routes secure. The veteran's voice grew stronger, more certain. Dr. H.A. still runs that medical center on Proxima Station. She's trained hundreds of alien doctors in human medical techniques, saved thousands of lives from species that once considered her an enemy. She never speaks of the war unless someone asks directly. Veltar reached for his drink with a cybernetic hand that no longer trembled. But sometimes when she thinks no one is watching, I've seen her looking up at the stars with an expression I recognize. The same look I saw in General Wu Jin's eyes. During the defense of Terra, the same look every human warrior wore when they were pushed beyond their breaking point. He leaned forward, his cybernetic arms creaking with the movement, and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Pray to whatever gods you worship that we never again give them reason to remember what they're capable of. Because somewhere in human space, there's still a General Wu Jin training the next generation of defenders. Still a Dr. H.A., healing the wounded and teaching others to do the same. Still children learning the old songs their grandparents sang during the war. The cantina had grown completely still. Even the newly arrived morning shift had stopped their preparations to listen. I've lived among humans for 2 decades now, Veltar continued. I've seen them laugh at children's games, cry at sad movies, work together to build hospitals and schools. They're kind, generous, creative people who want nothing more than to live in peace with their neighbors. His organic eye fixed on each face around the table in turn. But I've also seen their schools, where children still learn the tactical principles that won the defense of Terra. I've seen their museums, where the weapons and ships from the war are displayed with quiet pride. I've heard their music where the old battle songs are sung at festivals and celebrations. Veltar's voice grew quieter, more ominous. The humans are at peace. But peace, I've learned, is just another word for a weapon they're choosing not to use. They haven't forgotten how to fight. They've just decided that fighting should be the last option, not the first. He raised his glass one final time, his cybernetic hand steady, despite the magnitude of everything he'd shared, to the humans. May their peace last forever. May the galaxy never again be foolish enough to test their resolve. The cantina remained silent long after Veltar finished speaking, the weight of his words settling over the assembled aliens like the warm morning light streaming through the windows. Outside, the station continued its eternal rotation, carrying its inhabitants through the void between stars. But inside that small cantina, a group of young aliens had learned something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The humans were their friends and allies. But friendship, they now understood, was a gift that should never be taken for granted. Because somewhere in the darkness between the stars, 8 billion humans remembered exactly what they were capable of when that friendship was betrayed. The morning shift began their work around the silent tables, and gradually conversation returned to the cantina. But it was different now, quieter, more respectful. The story of humanity's wars had ended, but its lesson would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. The end.